I left the manor road for the street below, and a guard caught sight of me immediately. "Stand to," he called, his salute already in place by the time I reached him. "Good evening, sir." A few of my men had taken the brick wall beside the truck, passing a tin of Grace's biscuits between them until they abandoned it to gather round me. The lorry waited along the street with its tailboard lowered, the cake secured in the centre of the bed for the journey. The climb back to the manor offered little forgiveness. One descent taken too swiftly would send the whole thing sideways, and a sharp turn would finish what the hill began. I gave the arrangement one final inspection before turning back to the driver, brushing a thumb along my chin as I considered the route. "You will take the road around the eastern ridge," I said. "It will not survive the hill otherwise." I lifted a finger to add how this night belonged to Grace, and the cake must arrive as pristine as it left. But movement in the corner of my eye drew my attention away before the thought could finish. "And do not—" The rest of it lingered there as I found Grace through the bakery window, already dressed for the evening. She was in another blue dress I was partial to, setting off her pale skin and the streak of white in her hair that, for as long as I remembered, made her the most interesting person in any room without so much as opening her mouth. And when she did speak, it was never to impress or command, but always something kind and disarming that made people forget themselves. Her time in Hearthwick had been simple enough to manage: quiet streets, watchful men, a small circle in which she moved, untouched by the world beyond it. But England would not offer us the same shelter. Once she returned, Grace wouldn't remain unnoticed for long, and men with better titles and deeper fortunes than mine would remember quickly that she was unmarried. The dreadful conclusion to that line of thought followed easily enough. I made my intentions clear to her the night before, to my mind at least. But Grace had never been a woman who yielded simply because a thing was sensible. She hadn't, as a girl, and I knew if I placed our father's marriage contract before her and expected obedience, she would sooner tear it in two and drop the pieces at my feet. "Do not unload it until Lady Grace and I arrive," I said. "She will present it herself." "Very good, sir," he said, turning to see the others settled in the back with the cake. The lorry rolled off into the slow stream of people making their way towards the venue, and I turned back towards the bakery just as the guard stepped out onto the stoop. Grace followed them out, and I crossed the brick street to meet her, offering my arm. "Lovely as ever, my darling." She accepted it, and we set off towards the manor together. I laid my free hand over hers, a liberty I would normally avoid in public. But the circumstances I found myself in were shifting, and with them the manner in which I must conduct myself with her. The military would manage well enough once I stepped away from it. Grace, however, wouldn't, and if I intended to keep her beside me, it was time I began behaving accordingly before I found I was no longer in a position to reach her at all. We turned the street corner just as it began to fill with people drifting in from every direction, all of them making for the various celebrations scattered across Hearthwick. Under ordinary circumstances, I would have spared them little attention. The night before, however, made a measure of vigilance more necessary. My eyes moved over the street as we walked, measuring faces and movements while the guards followed a step behind us. Most were harmless enough, locals eager for distraction. But harmless didn't mean incapable of creating the sort of scene Grace endured the day before. A small group of men approached from the opposite direction, talking amongst themselves as they crossed our path. One of them allowed his eyes to travel over Grace with a familiarity I didn't care for. To these colonists, she was only another pretty girl passing on the street, someone they might take a chance on. They didn't know her worth, of course, but what irritated me more was how they seemed to believe they had any right to look at her so closely. My arm went around her waist, drawing her a little closer to my side, in the manner any man might place his arm about his wife, so that there would be no confusion as to whom she belonged. Grace gave a small hum at my sudden possessiveness, the amusement in her voice impossible to misinterpret. "You ought to be careful with those hands," she said. "People may begin to form ideas about the two of us." Small gestures had always seemed sufficient to me, a hand on her back when the street grew crowded, a quiet touch meant to comfort her, a kiss on her brow when distress threatened to undo her composure. To my mind, they spoke of my affection well enough, but I could see how a woman might choose to misunderstand them. A brother might do the same without inviting comment, and if that had been the measure Grace was using, then I'd done little to correct it. So if she required something unmistakable from me so that she might feel secure in what stood between us, then I could hardly refuse to give it to her. They would not be mistaken, I said, and glanced over at her. Which is precisely why I should make something plain, so you are not mistaken about my intentions either. So this was the moment. I'd rehearsed the conversation often enough. By rights, I should have known the words so well by now that they came out polished, but instead they felt strangely clumsy. When we return home, I said, once you have had a little time to settle and the first wave of attention passes. The phrases sounded almost childish for a declaration that governed the better part of my thinking since the day I started searching for her. Worse still, they carried through the street with a clarity that made me suddenly aware of how loudly I was saying them. I imagined something far more refined, but the truth of it refused to dress itself up. So that you are not left wondering, I intend to make you my wife as soon as it can be arranged. It was a strange thing to speak of now at all, when it had been understood between us since we were children. I'd thought it unnecessary to give words to the obvious, but the sound of the soft breath from her made me very glad that I had. She closed her eyes, smiling in that lovely way when she opened them again. I should like you to go on, she said, shrugging. But I fear if you do, all the cosmetics I put on will become a terrible mess. Tears of sadness or frustration were not something I welcomed from her, but moving her to tears in that way was something else entirely. A sensation so exquisite that I smiled as my thumb caught them before they could fall any farther. And I would not wish for that, so we shall leave the matter for later. The lights of the manor grew clearer as we climbed the last of the hill, the sound of music already drifting down from the terrace above. The guards who followed us fell forward, taking their place ahead of Grace as the men at the door opened it and stood to attention for her. I'd attended more of those sorts of evenings over the years than I cared to count, most of them endured with a certain disciplined tolerance and nothing more. That night, however, with Grace on my arm and our future decided, I suspected I might actually enjoy the party for once.